Crystalis, new from SNK. For play on the Nintendo Entertainment System. Are you up to the challenge?
Hi, I'm John Tickles, and welcome to Remote RPGs. You know, as a fan of RPGs, I sometimes get bored of that slow-paced combat. Don't you sometimes hate it when you're playing Final Fantasy VI, and you get into battle, after battle, after battle, after battle, and you crave something with a little more action? Fortunately, there's an action RPG genre, and games like Tales of Symphonia and Secret of Mana mix strategical RPG elements while putting your refined skills of mashing buttons like a friggin' maniac to good use. Today's review will cover an early 8-bit action RPG, Crystalis, for the Nintendo Entertainment System. For a 1990 NES game made by SNK, the company who brought us the Metal Slug and King of Fighters series, Crystalis is one of the only role-playing games on the system that still holds out very well today. However, perhaps due to a lack of interest in RPGs or underexposure, Crystalis didn't receive the full attention it deserved back in the day, despite some positive reviews. Fortunately, a lot more people now know about this classic gem because of the Game Boy port and word of mouth, but I still think it isn't talked about enough, so let's start by going over the plot. 100 years after global nuclear war, the creatures of Earth have become mutated and incredibly dangerous to humans. Kind of like the Transformers movies. Although science and technology have pretty much been abandoned by the few survivors of the New World, magic is still being used. However, there's an evil emperor who wants to take over the world, and oh my god, who the hell cares about the story? I'll go with the abridged version. You wake up from a cryogenic sleep, the world is going to shit, beat the crap out of everyone and thing with that sword, and that is all you need to know. Although the story was heavily praised back in 1990, it's definitely nothing special today. Just a typical fantasy quest with a cool sci-fi premise. You won't be interested in the story as it only comes with like one plot twist, and the characters aren't even very memorable. But the gameplay is so much fun that you won't even care. Upon starting the game, you'll notice that the main character is mostly purple, which can be terrifying in some circumstances given, but I don't know, couldn't he find a more threatening color to strike fear into the hearts of his opponents? It's weird because the box art and the commercial shows a guy with regular hair, but then that. Maybe he purposely chose that color because... well, I'm not gonna say it, but I will play this clip in the background.
And so I cry sometimes when I'm lying in bed just to get it out what's in my head, and I little peculiar. And so I wake in the morning and I step outside and I take a deep breath and get real high and loud. See to the top of my lungs, what's going on? And I say, hey, 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 I say, hey, what's going on? And I say, hey, 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 I say, hey, what's going on?
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
The gameplay of Crystalis is easy to learn, but there's a surprising amount of content here for a 1990 game. This is an action RPG that's very similar to The Legend of Zelda, as an overhead exploration game. In fact, the main gameplay is so similar that many have called Crystalis the sequel to Zelda that we should have gotten, rather than the side-scrolling RPG Zelda 2, aka the game that hates your guts. However, Crystalis doesn't feature the excellent puzzles of the Zelda series. meaning that Professor Layton disapproves. You visit many towns and dungeons, fighting monsters along the way to gain experience. I love how there's actually a healthy amount of places to visit, including deserts, green fields, and endless oceans. It's actually rumored that the setting of the game was inspired by the early Hayao Miyazaki movie, Nausicaa and the Valley of the Wind. But fortunately, the game has a much more subtle environmental message, as well as it doesn't have Shia LaBeouf. Anyway, what I crave in these games is that feeling of adventure.
Adventure! Yeah!
And that was definitely present here. While going along your quest for whatever the hero is trying to accomplish, you'll get a ton of helpful magic, like recovery and teleportation, along with armor and other typical RPG goodies. What's even cooler are the great Zelda-esque exploratory items, which in 1990 may have been a partial inspiration for later Zelda items. For example, you get boots that let you jump, and other boots that let you walk through harsh environments, and even more. So you get to change all of your equipment, and you have so many cool items. But you'll never change the fact that you have purple hair. So what's the combat in Crystalis like? Well, I like to sum it up like so.
I'll stab you in the face. I'll beat you in a running race. I won't hesitate to take your life. I'll even kill my own wife. What did you just say? Just kidding, honey.
Yes, in a fashion similar to The Legend of Zelda, more specifically A Link to the Past, Crystalis features a sword as your main weapon of choice. However, a twist is that Crystalis allows you to charge your weapon and release energy at any time. This is a feature that changes the strategies you'll be using to make the game feel less repetitious than it kind of is. With 4 different swords and 3 levels of charging for each, it's satisfying to mow down multiple enemies at once and watch the experience points rack up. The combat really puts your reflexes to the test as well, but more importantly, stresses remembering certain patterns, which is a staple of a good NES action game. Although this was all fun and good, there were some aspects of the combat that were troublesome. Just tapping the B button will allow your character to take a stab at the enemy, but with limited range, moving targets, and the option to fire a ranged shot so easily done, it makes using regular attacks almost useless. Also, hitting anything with that B attack was tough because the hero only throws out his sword for like a second before he immediately pulls it back. I assume while yelling, "Take that, you vicious brutes!" Oh! That's where I think later Zelda games worked this aspect a little better, as you can hold out your sword and poke the enemy. Finally, the hit detection was also a little bit off sometimes. It just didn't feel as clean as it could have. But other than these small technical issues, the combat in Crystalis was straight out fun, and the amount of magic and items you got made sure that things rarely got stale. The boss battles were also a great challenge, as there are many different bosses with many different combat styles, meaning that you couldn't use the same strategy twice. Furthermore, certain enemies are weak or strong against certain elements, meaning that you have to experiment a little and keep this in mind while fighting different enemies in different locations. In terms of length, Crystalis isn't that long of a game, but that really depends on if you use a walkthrough or not. What I mean is that the game doesn't always tell you what to do next, which was a typical method for lengthening games back in the NES days. As the Angry Video Game Nerd explained, this is what you'd call a Nintendo Power game. For example, to progress through this one part of the game, you have to use a certain spell to find a certain guy in a certain town, and this certainly wasn't spelled out for me. Also, the game will flat out block you off from progressing the story for pretty weak reasons. Like right here, it says I'm not strong enough. That's so arbitrary. Come on, Crystalis, let me through. However, if you're into looking for things and following non-existent clues, seek help. I personally don't feel like wasting my time with that stuff. And I think most of the game should be about, actually playing it, not wandering around the same area for hours upon hours. For an RPG on the Nintendo, the console famous for punishingly difficult games like Castlevania or Mother, Crystalis actually wasn't as hard as I expected it to be. The game gives you a lot of helpful items, almost too much money, and there isn't that much equipment management. If things get rough, it doesn't take too long to level up, even though you can only go up to level 16, probably because it's that easy to level up. Couple that with some pretty helpful healing spells, and you'll have a game that will kick your ass from time to time, but probably not enough to stop you for long. Some bosses got a little dicey later on, but despite my lack of NES experience, I made it through. The music in Crystalis was actually really good. Of course it didn't have the variety and the staying power of something like the original Mother, but the soundtrack is really upbeat and memorable. However, the sound effects in the game could get pretty annoying, especially the jumping. This was a huge problem for me because I felt like jumping around made me go faster, and I wanted to feel like a lovely hopping Peter Rabbit of death! The graphics in the game are pretty stunning for a 1990 NES game, save for the previously mentioned fact that you look like the godless love child of Barney and Richard Simmons. The enemy designs were varied, and the animations left really nothing to complain about given the time period. That effect of charging up your sword attack is still so awesome, even to this day, and I never get tired of looking at it. The opening and closing cutscenes were really impressive, with lush colors, and there was also a variety of locations to make sure that the game was never really too boring to look at. So, after all that, does Crystalis still hold out today? Well, yeah, for the most part. I would say that the game is still loads of fun to play today. The world is large and pretty well constructed. There's a lot of secrets and nice goodies to seek out, and the combat still manages to be fun and a good challenge over 20 years later. However, because of some unavoidable issues, like the need of a walkthrough and small control issues, it may be somewhat frustrating for newer gamers to go back and give it a shot. But, if you want some old school greatness with a strong RPG twist, then you really can't do much better than Crystalis. It isn't too hard to track down these days, and it's a classic that RPG fans, especially Zelda fanatics, should at least give a try. It's too bad that we haven't seen a sequel or a port since the Game Boy Color version, and it looks like we won't even get a Virtual Console release for it. That is truly a shame, and I hope that we gamers can keep Crystalis alive as a marvel of the action RPG genre. Well, that's all for now. I'm John Tickles, and I look forward to our next random encounter.
Just keep it inside. Learn how to hide your feelings.